On today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, we continue our conversation surrounding Jeff Nixon. Who is he? What can he bring to an offense? Don't listen to me. Take it from an expert, Jackson Holzer, Locked On Syracuse. Let's talk football.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily podcast on the Houston Texans. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Battle Red Nation. I'm your Texans credential media member and Texans football analyst, John Hickman, joined by Jackson Holzer of the Locked On Syracuse podcast. The family is in the building. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Locked On Texans, Locked On Syracuse, and for being a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's episode, to end off the episode, I'll look at my thoughts on the offensive coordinator search as it is right now. We also continue the conversation surrounding Jeff Nixon. What does he bring to his offense? What does that offense bring out of a quarterback? I wanted to get your thoughts on that, Jackson. And also just who is Jeff Nixon altogether? I thought that we did a pretty good job the other day talking about it, but why not hear from the experts? And that's where you come in. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Jackson. Syracuse had a great year. Kyle McCord looks like the number 5th quarterback prospect in this year's draft. Nobody saw that coming. 5 guys with over 500 receiving yards or more. Running back out the backfield has 500 receiving yards. Everything is clicking. The offense is one of the best in the nation. So tell us, who is Jeff Nixon?
Jeff Nixon is a wizard, or at least that's what he showed in his first season at Syracuse. He is someone who I think would very much fit Houston Texans right now. But as far as what he did at Syracuse, this is Syracuse football that we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen. We're not talking about Ohio State. We're not talking about Alabama. We're talking about Syracuse football, all right? And they had a really good year. They had one of the top offenses in all of college football, and they had a record-setting quarterback by the name of Kyle McCord. Did you know that he threw for the most yards in ACC history? Did you know that?
I knew that.
Yeah.
Found out the other day. Kyle McCord had a couple good games this year.
Kyle McCord was on fire this season, but really the impressive part about Jeff Nixon was, again, this is Syracuse football we're talking about. They get Kyle McCord from Ohio State, and he instantly becomes better in his offense. And we'll go over his offense here on this show. Trevor Pena was one of their leading receivers. Go look up Trevor Pena's college numbers before this season. I promise you, he shattered all of his previous career highs. Jackson Meeks was a transfer from Georgia, but he barely saw the field at Georgia when he was at Georgia. Comes to Syracuse for 1 year, was not even a starter heading into the season. Has 1,000 yards, leads the entire team. LaQuinn Allen becomes one of the best all-around backs in the country, who, by the way, is now going to be taken in the NFL draft. Something that I didn't think I was going to say heading into this season. So overall, the thing with Jeff Nixon is that he took Syracuse and their personnel, he figured out their strengths, and he knew their weaknesses too, and he maximized their abilities.
So what about the personnel and maximizing their strength, minimizing their weaknesses? What about that should Texan fans really, if you explain it to them, which you will, what about that should Texan fans want? Because here in Houston, this offense was on life support throughout the year. Had moments where maybe you thought they were going to score 30, but then in the second half, zero offensive touchdowns. And so for an offense that struggled getting into the end zone, for an offense that struggled converting on third downs, what about Jeff Nixon's offense? Can you tell our listeners and viewers to put them at ease that if he is the next offensive coordinator, they should be excited and thrilled about him walking into that building?
There's never such thing as a guarantee. There's never a guarantee, all right? But what I will tell you about Jeff Nixon is that specifically at quarterback and with CJ Stroud, I think he can maximize him. And I said on the podcast for Locked On Syracuse fans about how if for some reason, if there's a Texans fan that stumbles upon my podcast about it and being interviewed, I would draft CJ Stroud in fantasy because what he does is he runs a spread offense. A lot of 4 wide, 5 wide sets, and it relies on a short passing game. Think of it this, John. Syracuse football threw the ball more than almost anyone in the entire country. Now, you would think for a team that throws the ball a significant amount of time, they wouldn't control the clock a lot, right? That would be logical because you'd have incompletions, the clock is going to stop, inevitably your offense stalls out, you're going to punt the ball, and the other team is going to control the clock, right? You would figure.
You would think.
Yeah, well, Syracuse football led the ACC or top 2 in the ACC in time of possession. And it's because most of the time when they were throwing, it was very short. They're going to spread you out, and it relies on a quarterback. And this is why I can work with CJ Stroud, because I'm sure he can process a defense. I've watched the NFL. I know he's really talented. I saw him in college. He can process a defense pre-snap, figure out who he thinks is going to be open, and anticipate very, very quickly. It's also a system that doesn't rely on having the best offensive line in football. See, if you have a quarterback that's going to run around significantly, you need an offensive line. Syracuse's offensive line is not very good, or was not very good. That was a huge question mark, but it looked a lot better. And the reason why it looked a lot better is because they throw it so quickly. Kyle McCord's getting rid of the ball in 1-2 seconds. You have no time to rush the passer. None. And the moment, John, the moment you think it's coming, he's going to throw that slant route, that's when Jeff Nixon calls a play that's going to 50 yards down the field. It's going to be a streak down the field, and you just didn't see it coming. And when I look at the Houston Texans personnel, I see CJ Stroud. I see a suspect offensive line. I see a running back in Joe Mixon who can do a little bit of everything, right? He can do a little bit of everything. You got Nico Collins, one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. I'm not sure about Tank Dell with his health, and isn't Stephon Diggs a free agent? But regardless, they're going to get other weapons, and they have Dalton Schultz. They have enough there. He is someone that can take the current personnel and get the best out of them with his system. A spread offense, a short passing game that relies on a quarterback to anticipate pre-snap where he's going to go with the football. They have that with CJ Stroud.
You know what? Let's continue this conversation when we come back, because you mentioned a couple of things. You don't need the greatest offensive line to be successful in this offense. And for a lot of Texan fans, that's a concern. This offensive line was pretty bad this year. And so if he is the next offensive coordinator, I want you to dive more into that. How much of his offense can hide the limitations of an offensive line? And also look at Dalton Schultz. And if Houston decides to keep him this year, they have 3 tight ends on this roster. What about this offense can maximize a tight end that doesn't like to block and doesn't like to get dirty? So we got more Locked On Texans. We're Locked On Syracuse. The family links up. More Texans talk on the way. This message is a message from our sponsors, TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with TurboTax experts across the nation who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Who doesn't like that, right? All you have to do is sit back, relax, and you'll get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. This is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates, only available in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. Jackson, an offensive line here in Houston, one of the worst in the NFL this year. So much so that we saw the quarterback regress in terms of progression, in terms of mechanics, and not having the time to go through his progression. This offense, you mentioned that Jeff Nixon that he runs up in Syracuse, because they didn't run the ball well, right? I think the average was 3.7 yards per carry or something like that.
It's tough in college to do yards per carry because it's skewed. When a quarterback gets sacked, that counts as negative rushing yards. So that's going to hurt your yards per carry. The better way I would look at it is LaQuint Allen, who's an NFL back, ran for over 1,000 yards, which is great. He averaged 4.5 yards per carry. That's great in the NFL, but for the ACC in college football, it's actually not very high. It was one of the lowest ones in college football. So you can continue your point, but that is a better indicator, I think, of their offensive line.
But Kyle McCord was one of the most pressured quarterbacks in that conference, right?
Correct. And that is because they threw the ball more than anyone in the country. If you actually look at the rate in which he was pressured, it wasn't that high. And the reason why he wasn't pressured a whole lot is because you're getting rid of the ball so fast. If you're playing D-line, right? You're trying to get to the quarterback in about 2 seconds. That's the goal. If you can get there within 2 seconds, great. And if you're an offensive lineman, your job is to hold up for about 2 seconds. Once that 2 seconds is up, that sack is on the quarterback. It is. Like, I know we all want the offensive line to be the Great Wall of Dallas and hold up for 3, 4, 5 seconds. That's not usually how it works because pass rushers are really good. What you need is your line to just hold up for a couple seconds. If that's all it can do, that's fine. It'll work for a Jeff Nixon offense because the ball is out very quickly.
And so what you're saying is in his offense is designed to make everybody's job easier.
Yes, it's going to make the offensive line easier. Now, I can't tell you that Joe Mixon's going to run for 1,000,000 yards per carry if your offensive line's not very good. But what I will tell you is that you're not going to have to worry as much about CJ Stroud sitting on his pants after a play because the offensive line just completely blew up. Because he should, if he's following the offense correctly, he should be throwing it in a timely fashion to the point where the offensive line doesn't have to hold up for a whole lot long. They don't.
So Jeff Nixon has over 2 decades worth of coaching experience. Last year was his first year calling plays as an offensive coordinator at Syracuse. Coming into last year, I read an article where Zed Haynes said, man, I've never seen this many motions and shifts in the offense. Kyle McCord also praised him in the amount of formations that they had to learn in that offense. What about that part of the game that creates confusion for defense and more favorable matchups where you've seen guys, maybe a number wide receiver 3, maybe a wide receiver 4, be able to come in and have an impact on that offense?
I think the best way to describe it is you know what's coming, but you don't know what's coming. Because it's not a super complicated offense. It's a spread offense. There's a ton of wide receivers on the field. You know they want to throw it short. They're going to throw it probably within 10 yards. You just don't know what the primary read is going to be on any play. You don't know if there's a motion coming. You don't know if they're going to throw the bubble screen or if the quarterback's going to look off the bubble screen and decide to throw the 5-yard slant. A lot of RPOs in the Jeff Nixon system. For those that don't know what an RPO is, run pass option. That's what it means. The quarterback gets the ball and he has a couple of choices. He can hand it off to Joe Mixon if you're CJ Stroud, or he can throw the 5-yard slant. Sometimes there would be a triple option involved where there would be someone in motion. He could hand it off to Joe Mixon. He could throw it to another wide receiver that's in motion to make it a bubble screen, or he could throw the 5-yard slant or the 5-yard hitch. So that's kind of the complexity of it because it's not like a super complicated system to understand if you just watch Syracuse football. It's just that you think you know, but you don't really know.
How important is blocking for the skill position guys? Because we got a tight end here,
yeah.
Dalton Schultz, and I don't know if you saw the playoff game, but lined up one-on-one with George Karlaftis and lost almost every rep, resulted in 3 sacks on CJ Stroud. But then also throughout the year, maybe Houston's trying to get the screen game going and wide receivers are not getting out there in space to block. And so the offensive line may not be the greatest, but what about the skill position guys that are trying to fight and get on the field and do the small things?
Well, the first thing I would say is why is Dalton Schultz blocking George Karlaftis?
And that's why Bobby Sloak is no longer in Houston.
How many tight ends are blocking him? Like George Kittle, maybe? Like he's a pretty good pass rusher, right? He got over 10 sacks a couple years this year. He's pretty good, so I wouldn't do that. But, I mean, Oronde Gadsden, he's going to be drafted in the NFL draft. He's not known necessarily as a blocking tight end. What I will say is that you kind of, if you're going to throw a bunch of screen routes, which sometimes Jeff Nixon will do, you're going to have to block. And you're going to have to buy into it. And whether you're good or bad, you have to buy into it. Like that's a lot of times what it is with these receivers when they're blocking a corner. Like we're not asking Nico Collins to block a defensive end. That's not the point. If that's the goal, then there's no receiver that can do that. Can Nico Collins block a corner? Absolutely. You need buy-in, really, is what I would say. So it helps the offensive line, but when they have that short passing game, when there's going to be those bubble screens, it does rely on the personnel to be able to block.
Yeah. I'm a big believer in whoever they hire at OC should have their hand-picked offensive line coach, wide receivers coach, running back coach, tight end coach. Who's on that coaching staff that you could see Nixon bringing along with him if he does decide to come to Houston?
I could see him trying to bring over the quarterbacks coach, Nunzio Campanelli. Now, Nunzio Campanelli has survived multiple coaching regimes at Syracuse. He was there before Fran Brown, who's now the head coach there. Fran Brown decided to keep him as a holdover. That's pretty common when an organization, college or pro, makes a coaching change. They want to leave over a couple of coaches because either A, they're good coaches, or B, it's just to have some sort of continuity from year in and year out with the new staff. But I could see him try to poach him because I think Nunzio Campanelli deserves a lot of credit as well for what he did with Kyle McCord. I mean, he's the quarterback's coach. He's working on his mechanics every single day. They're working on reads every single day. It's not just Jeff Nixon. It's got to be also Nunzio Campanelli, the quarterback coach. I could see that. Now, what I will also add about Jeff Nixon is this, because I'm not sure if you were going to ask me about it. So I'll tell you right now. I could see him taking the Houston Texans job. I could absolutely see it if he's offered. But what I should warn you is that his son, Will Nixon, is on the Syracuse team right now. And he's got another year of eligibility. He's going to play. He's coming off an injury, but he should be back and ready to go at some point next season. He might, and I don't have a source on this, but he could very easily say, thanks, but no thanks. I want to coach my son another year.
Any concern of his offense not being able to translate to the NFL?
Yeah, I think the one concern is it's the lack of running the ball often. That was a criticism I had of Jeff Nixon in the beginning of the season. The offense was clicking, but they weren't running the ball a whole lot. And you got to be able to run the football. Now it works when you're at Syracuse and you're playing most of your games inside a dome. And I know the Texans play in a dome as well as the Indianapolis Colts. So that's another game for you right there. What's going to happen when there's weather? Inclement weather is what I would be worried about, because a passing game and weather, I don't know. I mean, it works sometimes with the aliens in the NFL.
To combat that, though, was it because he did not maybe didn't have the running back in that system to thrive? Because here in Houston, let's say he does come to Houston.
Right.
You have Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon has seen every type of bad offensive line in the NFL.
Yeah.
And yet he's still able to put up 1,000 yards. The criticism of this offense this year, a part of it was, hey, why not hit some of these guys underneath, which we brought up Joe Mixon. Why not hit Joe Mixon underneath? And so he could help relieve some of the hits that he's taken by taking the ball out of his hands as a runner and putting the ball in his hands as a passer. But I guess would the concern still be there if he's in the NFL with Houston Texans? Excuse me, with the Houston Texans, and Joe Mixon is his running back.
So yeah, I don't think it's a running back thing, because I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tell you LaQuint Allen is Joe Mixon, but what I will tell you is that LaQuint Allen is on the level of Joe Mixon in terms of comparing relative to college, right? So if you're looking at tiers of running backs in all of college football, LaQuint Allen was an elite running back in college football. It was more about, I think, the offensive line of Syracuse. This was not a team that you could be the most balanced offense in the world, as demonstrated from LaQuint Allen's yards per carry. It's not because of LaQuint Allen. It's because the offensive line, quite frankly, is not the greatest unit. They're not getting the 4- and 5-star recruits that Ohio State is getting, where they're going to open up gaping holes on every single run play, right? This is Syracuse we're talking about here. But the reason why I bring up the lack of running is because if he does decide to translate that to the NFL, Syracuse football last season dealt with no games where weather was really much of a factor. They play inside of a dome. Some of their non-conference game against UNLV is inside a dome. They didn't have any weather they had to deal with last season. ever. It was mostly good conditions. Boston College was a little cold when they went there, but that's it. So what's going to happen when the Houston Texans are the number 3 seed in the AFC and they got to go to snowy Buffalo in the division round and they're going to try to throw the ball 50 times with CJ Stroud? That is where I would be concerned and say, I don't know if that's going to work.
Thank you for stopping by. My man Jackson, we got more information on Jeff Nixon. And again, he is my current favorite of all of the coaches the Houston Texans have interviewed to be their next potential offensive coordinator. I love his I love the way how he called plays takes the pressure off the quarterback, especially on early downs. And I think that's where a lot of Texan fans want to see the next offensive coordinator do with CJ Stroud. Just make his job easier. And Kyle McCord, who wasn't like that at Ohio State, and to have the season he had last year, blew a lot of people away. I think that's a guy that you should be able to trust with an elite quarterback, like we all believe CJ Stroud will be for the future, for his future in the NFL. Thank you, Jackson, for stopping by.
Of course, anytime.
And before we move on, guys, this is the perfect opportunity to let you in on a big secret. Everybody knows about it, but I got to tell you about Gametime. We all love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. One of our favorite things to do in my family is to get together and go laugh with one another. Or go to a Rockets game, and you can do that with Gametime. And now Gametime has made it even easier to get tickets on your favorite events with a new feature, Gametime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers, as we continue to talk about the Houston Texans offensive search. I just want to say a few things before we close out today's show. Number one, I love Jeff Nixon. I really do. I think he's different. He's a name we haven't heard before, coming from a place that nobody expected. Syracuse up north, going to come down and coach down south. But again, he has over 2 decades worth of coaching experience. He's been everywhere. He's coached everything. And when he finally got his shot to be an offensive coordinator at the college ranks, Kyle McCord comes out of nowhere and have a monster year. The offense was able to find a multitude of guys doing a multitude of different things, and it was based around getting the ball out of your hands. And like my man Jackson said, limit them and minimize the weaknesses of that offense, which was a bad offensive line. Overcoming a bad offensive line and having your quarterback break an ACC record, that's a positive. Here in Houston, they had a bad offensive line, didn't do well in terms of blocking and giving C.J. Stroud the time that he needed, and Bobby Slug was unable to overcome that. We were still seeing long, drawn-out route concepts. We were still seeing wide receivers run the same 15-yard breaking in routes. That's an issue. Jeff Nixon seems as though he's a guy that understands what each receiver on the field should be able to do in terms of down to distance and how to maximize those players. And I'm quite honest, to be quite honest with you, Houston moving on from Dalton Schultz. We all want to talk about it. A lot of people want to see that happen. The last time we saw Dalton Schultz play football, lackluster, was poor from a blocking standpoint. But what I also said was this was an offense from an offensive coordinator standpoint that didn't know his personnel. That isn't George Kittle out there. You're no longer in San Fran. This is Houston. This is Dalton Schultz, a guy that Dallas moved on from because of his inability to have the effort to block him. And so I like Jeff Nixon. He's the lead for me. Curious to see what the Houston Texans, how the Houston Texans view him. But as of right now, quarterbacks coach Gerard Johnson, Bucs QB coach Thad Lewis, Syracuse offensive coordinator Jeff Nixon, Rams tight end coach and passing game coordinator Nick Caley. And also the Houston Texans will interview offensive assistant Bill Lazor for their offensive coordinator position. Houston is in a very interesting position right now. They should not rush this process. This is year 3. This is a crucial year where you want to make sure the guy that you have will be the same guy, unless he moves on to be a head coach, will be the same guy that can carry you through C.J. Stroud's contract negotiations. You want your offensive coordinator here because around that time, with what we've seen from the Buffalo Bills and their inability to get to the big game, from what we've seen from the Baltimore Ravens and their inability to at least get to an AFC conference game. With the Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback situation up and down, Joe Burrow and the Bengals, that's the name that you got to always keep close to. You understand that they can get hot at any moment. They got hot at the end of the year. That defense was bad offensive line. Houston right now is in the mix to be able to say, we're up next. The Kansas City Chiefs may just win 3 Super Bowls in a row. That may happen. But what you want to do coming out of this offseason, is have your offensive coordinator that has a plan to be able to keep this offense up with some of the best offenses in the NFL. Who's that guy? Which one of those guys will the Houston Texans bring in to be able to maximize C.J. Stroud? This offense lives and dies with C.J. Stroud. When he's not playing well, you're banking on your defense to win your game. When he's playing well, everything else around him is operating smoothly. And Chip Kelly was a name that a lot of people were interested in and excited about. My man Texas Cap on Twitter tweeted today over the weekend, he was told while there was some interest, the Chip Kelly angle was more agent-driven than team interest-driven. You look at two of those coaches, Dad Lewis, Jeff Nixon, they were on that Chip Kelly coaching staff at some point in their career. And so I think what the Houston Texans are doing right now, they're picking the brains of a coach to see the guy that we like. If we can't get him, are you close to that guy? What's your formations like? It's 3rd and 8. What route concepts would you run with Nico Collins on the field and a Tank Dell and a Dalton Schultz? How would you attack this defense? How would you attack cover 3? Your offensive line isn't playing well. What would you do to make sure your quarterback can continue to stand upright? And if that's the case, if they're looking for the next best thing, if Chip Kelly is the best thing, and if they're looking for the next best thing, to me, it screams Jeff Nixon. To me, it's a no-brainer, at least to the guys that they've interviewed or will interview right now. There's no big names on this list. I love that. The big name doesn't automatically mean success. The hot name doesn't automatically mean success. The hot system does not automatically mean success. What can you do for the offense that we have right now? And again, as of right now, it's Jeff Nixon for me. He has my vote. I am very curious to see how the Houston Texans finish this offensive coaching search. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. Please be sure to subscribe, like, and comment on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast. And give me a follow on Twitter at John_Hickman12. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.